True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
After middle-aged couple Wayne and Sharmon Stock were brutally killed in their Nebraska farmhouse, police decided that a family member was behind their murder. A nephew confessed and implicated his cousin as his accomplice, but they still needed physical evidence. Enter forensics investigator David Kofoed. Kofoed found a spot of blood underneath the steering wheel of a car. DNA testing confirmed that the blood was Wayne Stock's, but other evidence at the scene was not adding up. The discovery of an engraved ring in the Stock house turned the investigation in the right direction. The ring was traced to a Wisconsin couple whose truck had been stolen with the ring inside of it. 2 teenagers had stolen the truck, and they took it for a joyride. Join us at the quiet end today for Nebraska Joyride. This is a fascinating case involving a false confession, 2 cold-blooded killers, and a forensics investigator charged with planting evidence.
So we're going to drink a Nebraska beer. I think we've had 0 cases from Nebraska. Now I've had like 2 in the last month or so.
Well, we had Jessica O'Grady.
Right.
A little while back.
Recent. In this one. So what I'm drinking today is Vanilla Bean Fathead from Nebraska Brewing Company. And this is a barley wine, what is considered an American barley wine, which makes it a little more hoppy, a little more aggressive. So it's a pretty beer. It's a copper color. There's a very tiny beige head. Nice aroma of dark fruit, caramel, and vanilla. Then when you taste it, man, raisins and prunes, and you say, but no, they work really well.
All right.
Some caramel, some vanilla, and some oak. So it's a pretty smooth barley wine, and you don't even notice the alcohol content in there.
Well, Dick, I find that hard to believe, but I'll try it.
You'll try it.
Yes.
And I'm going to make sure you don't drink too much of it because it's pretty potent.
I bet it is. Those barley wines usually are.
And this one is.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's open it up. All right, let's go on down. And you can start out our story, and I really think this is a fascinating story. It's got a lot to it, and it kind of intersects with another case that we did a few months back.
It does, and I hope I'm not giving things away, but finding out about the ownership of this ring as evidence from the house took some real digging. I'm impressed that they were able to track it down. So the couple, they were very well regarded in their small community. I think the population of their town was like 200, something like that. Wayne and Sharmon Stock, and we've got 2 different pronunciations. It's spelled S-T-O-C-K. I've heard people pronounce it Stock, and also people pronounce it as Stoke. But I'm going to go with Stock because that's how it's spelled.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So
plus, Keith Morrison called it Stock.
Well, so. If Keith called it Stock, that has to be correct.
That's right, yes.
So this couple was found shot to death in their home in rural Nebraska the day after Easter in 2006. They were found by their 27-year-old son, Andy. So these were farmer-type people. He was a bit of an entrepreneur. They lived in the house in the middle of nowhere. Wayne grew and sold hay, grass, and straw. Andy helped his father with the family farm. Sharmon owned a cake business, which she ran from her house, and she was a part-time teacher's aide. They had raised their family in the tiny town of Murdock, Nebraska. Crime had never been an issue there. In fact, like you hear often, most people didn't bother to lock their windows or doors.
Yeah, their population was actually less than 300. Like you said, it was very small. And everyone there knew the Stocks, so the entire town, of course, was just shocked by these murders.
Everyone knew everybody else.
These were brutal murders, too.
Yeah. Andy said he showed up about 9 o'clock in the morning. I noticed right away that things didn't seem correct, didn't seem right. His father hadn't made the coffee, and the newspaper was still sitting out front. So those are 2 distinct variations in Dad's routine. Wayne would have normally been out working the farm by 9, but when Andy looked around, there's no sign of him. And inside the house, no one answered him when he called. Sharmon was a dedicated housekeeper. She kept a spotless home. And as far as Andy could tell, nothing was disturbed in the downstairs. So he went upstairs to see if Wayne was in his office. As he gets to the top of the stairs, he's seeing this horrible sight of his father's dead body, face down on the hallway carpet. There was a large puddle of blood on the carpet, and there was blood and brain matter splattered on the walls. Wayne's face was covered in blood, horribly disfigured.
Yeah, so at this point he hadn't seen his mother, but his cell phone was out in his truck, so he ran outside to call 911. His call came into the dispatcher at 9:11 a.m., and he was uncertain of his mother's whereabouts and, of course, worried about her and what kind of condition she might be in. Police arrived, and they didn't find a weapon. Wayne's wallet was full of cash and sitting untouched in his office. His gold watch was still there, too, along with all of Sharmon's jewelry. Sharmon was also dead of a gunshot wound to her head, and her body lay between her bed and a wall. Both she and Wayne were in their pajamas with nothing on their feet, so it looked like they were asleep and had been woken up by their killer or killers. Sharmon also had the telephone near her with the cord stretched across her body, so of course that indicated that she probably tried to call for help. So it wasn't something that they were just shot in their sleep. They had a chance to be terrified. So this is a horrible, horrible crime.
So the local Cass County sheriff got help with the case because, after all, they're a pretty small town, and they don't do murder investigations ever, if at all. So they called the Douglas County CSI and the state police. There were shotgun shells found at the scene, and that told them that Wayne and Sharmon had been killed with a 12-gauge shotgun, and they apparently had been deceased for several hours. They also found some other evidence at the crime scene, which included a flashlight and a marijuana pipe, and the pipe was felt to be the killer's pipe, at least as far as investigators could tell. They also found both live and spent shotgun shells that had been left. So the brutality of the crime and the remote location of the Stock's house led police to believe that the murder was done by someone who knew the couple and might have had a grudge against them. A criminal profiler from Omaha said that since nothing was stolen, and because both victims were shot at point-blank range, the perpetrator had come with the intent to kill them. The pattern of blood spatter on a wall showed that someone had been standing in the room when Wayne was shot.
Yeah, an area without blood spatter they call a void, and that indicates that someone was standing in front of the wall when Wayne was shot, someone other than the shooter. So this meant there had to be more than one person that went in that house and was involved in these killings. Investigators started their investigation, of course, by interviewing people close to the couple, including their family members. More than one relative mentioned that Wayne and Sharmon had a long-running conflict with their nephew, Matt Livers. Matt had lived with his grandmother, and he believed that he should inherit his grandmother's house. But his aunt and uncle had disagreed, and they had told him to move out of that house. And he was angry with them when that happened.
Now, Matt was described as immature and intellectually disabled. He was the oldest son of Wayne Stock's sister, but he had no criminal record. Throughout his school years, he was in special ed classes and had a diagnosis of a learning disability. So he was a simple guy. I think I read somewhere that his IQ was, in the 70-80 range, somewhere around there?
We'll get to that, yeah.
Okay. He also had wanted to be a cop, and he was anxious to help with the investigation.
Yeah, he seemed very naive.
Oh, he sure did.
Matt was first interviewed late into the evening on the day his aunt and uncle's bodies were found. He said that the disagreement with Wayne and Sharmon was way in the past and they'd made up. A newspaper delivery man and his girlfriend told police that they saw a tan car parked near the Stock's house that night. And shortly after, they saw a car that looked like the same car drive past them at a high rate of speed. Matt didn't own a tan car, but his cousin Will did own a tan Ford Contour. Also, the Contour had been taken to a car wash just hours after the murders, so that really looked suspicious.
Yeah, I can see where that would look a little suspicious.
Well, more than a little, unless he's in the habit of getting his car washed early in the morning like that.
Right. So the car gets towed to Omaha and processed by a CSI team, but they didn't find any blood or DNA. However, the police seem to have made up their minds that Matt was involved in the murders. So 2 days later, CSI Commander Kofoed re-examined the car. And that was at the request of the investigators. They said, take another look at it. And this time he came up with a speck of blood under the steering column of the car, and analysis of it showed that it belonged to Wayne Stock. Surprise, surprise.
So if you're going to go with me here with a bit of a conspiracy with the police and Kofoed, after doing some reading, I've kind of gone down that road. It's kind of like they told him to do it with a wink wink. You know, take another look at it. I bet you can find something. And that's the way I see it. Matt Livers agreed to be fingerprinted, and he also gave a DNA sample. On April 25th, investigators Lambert and Shank picked up Matt at his house in Lincoln, Nebraska, and took him about 50 miles away to the Plattsmouth Sheriff's Office. And they began questioning him that day early, like around 9 a.m. And when questioned, Matt said that he spent most of Easter Sunday at his grandmother's house. He got back home at around 5:30 p.m. that day and was there for the rest of the night. He said that he slept with his fiancée all that night, and also his fiancée told police that he was home with her all that night. Nick Sampson's girlfriend also said that Nick was home with her all night, and she even passed a polygraph. Matt agreed to take a polygraph that afternoon, and the detectives told him that he had failed. The polygraph examiner told Matt that the results were irrefutable evidence that he had either killed his aunt and uncle or that he knew who did. But Matt continued to deny being there that night. He said that he was really nervous during the test and maybe that's why he didn't pass it. But he just insisted that he was telling the truth.
They continued questioning him, so it's now like 5 or 6 hours into the questioning. Lambert and Schenk got tough, and they began to directly accuse Matt of being responsible for the murders. Matt continued to deny being involved, and he did this at least 10 times, but his interrogators wouldn't quit.
It's a painful interrogation to watch, actually, because they really were going hard on him.
Well, they went right after him, that's for sure.
They did. They also told Matt that he was facing a death sentence, and the only way for him to save himself was to take responsibility for these murders. At one point, he was told that if he didn't confess, that investigators would go for the death penalty, and they would do everything in their power to see that he got that, saying that they would do everything they could to see him hang. So it was rough. And these were people that Matt respected and looked up to. So you can see this was intimidating. Investigators made up this story of how Matt snapped and killed his aunt and uncle because he was angry with them about the inheriting of his grandmother's house. Maybe he was tired of being poor while Wayne and Sharmon were living this better life, and they were unwilling to share the wealth with him. And Matt finally began to agree with them after about 6 hours of interrogation. He ended up taking complete responsibility for the murders, but investigators weren't satisfied with that because they knew there had to be more than one person involved. So then they started pressuring him to name an accomplice. And the only time that they really got satisfied with that was when he mentioned his cousin, Nick Sampson. Then they jumped right on that.
They sure did. Nick's the brother of Will, and that's the cousin who owned the tan Ford Contour.
Right.
So now we've got the paper deliverer who saw this car that sort of fits the description of the Contour, at least by color. We've got a link there with the cousin who owns it. So we're after him. We got Matt and we've got Nick.
Yeah, and I think that they actually considered Will as well, but he had an airtight alibi.
He did, although he also told them that he never loaned the car to Matt or Nick.
Yeah, so the whole thing was a bit of a stretch. And when Matt confessed, he never mentioned Jessica Reed or Greg Fester. And we'll get to that.
Right, we sure will.
But this aggressive questioning continued until Matt implicated Nick, and Nick, who was working as a cook at the local pub, was arrested at his workplace that same night.
As was Matt. Matt didn't get out of the police station.
No, they were both arrested, But the following day, Matt withdrew his confession. He said that he had been making things up just to satisfy the interrogators. But they weren't accepting that. They were sticking with the confession. So Matt remained in jail, and his cousin Nick, who was 21 at the time, was a little bit brighter and less naive. He seemed more aware of his rights. He did agree to take a polygraph just to clear himself, but when they came back and told him he failed it, he stopped talking and asked for an attorney, basically telling them that's bullshit.
Right.
Both of these guys remained in jail for months, and they were charged with first-degree murder and told that they would face the death penalty if they were convicted. All of their property, including guns and clothing, were tested for blood and gunshot residue, but they found nothing to connect them to the murders, except for the blood found by Kofoed in Will's car.
You know, the marijuana pipe and the flashlight that had been found at the scene had DNA, but it didn't match either of the suspects. Now, there was a ring that was found in the kitchen, on the kitchen floor, actually. And that's going to be the thing that helps solve the case. Amazing. It's a gold-colored ring, and it was engraved with "Love Always, Corey and Ryan." It was a very unusual ring because the inscription was on the outside, not the inside.
Yeah, it wasn't your normal engraving. It was actually big dark letters around the outside of the ring. It was a men's ring, size 10. It also had a jeweler's name on it, and it could be traced back to a company in New York State. But this company was going out of business, right then. So Christine Gabbig worked for the Douglas County Crime Lab, and she was the investigator responsible for finding the ring's origins. In a video-recorded interview, she said that she had called the company and spoke to a woman who was cleaning out the office for the last day there. So it's possible that if she'd called the next day, she wouldn't have reached anyone.
Right. And this woman just looked all through all this paper stuff. There wasn't anything on computers. It was all paper.
Yeah, she
paper
had to
trail.
go through thousands of papers.
A task. I'm just amazed.
Yeah, she said it took her 2 or 3 days, but what else are you going to do? You have to work for it.
Yeah.
So Gabbig learned that the ring had been ordered by a Corey Zastrin at the Walmart in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. So that was a big surprise. She had purchased it in 2004 for her boyfriend, Ryan, but they had since broken up, and Ryan had left the ring in his red 2002 Dodge pickup. His pickup truck was stolen that Easter Sunday by 2 teenagers, Gregory Fester, 19, and Jessica Reed, who was 17. So these 2 were both being held in custody in Wisconsin for a multi-state crime spree, stealing cars and breaking into homes. But still, it's really surprising that the ring had come all the way from Wisconsin to Nebraska.
Isn't it? Think of the likelihood or the possibility.
Yeah, it's very unlikely.
Yeah, no kidding.
So investigators Lambert and Shank, the 2 who had interviewed Matt Livers, went to Wisconsin to interrogate Jessica Reed and Gregory Fester.
Yeah, these are 2 loser teenagers.
Yeah.
To be blunt. Jessica Reed, of course, denied her involvement in the murders, and she claimed that she and Fester had merely stolen an envelope with $500 in it, and they left.
Yeah, she didn't even know what state she was in.
Nope. And then she blamed Fester for the killings. So we went from, no, we just took money, an envelope with money, and now there were 2 people killed, but it was my boyfriend that did it. Of course, he turned around and blamed her. So we've got, you killed him, no, I didn't, you killed him, that type of thing.
Yeah, these were some fucked up kids because Jessica at first was like, can we make this quick? I have to go see my grandma. Not taking it very seriously at all. Which I guess a lot of teenagers are like that. But then she was just very cold-blooded. For a young girl, it was pretty shocking.
It was.
So investigators were fully committed to the fact that they believed Matt Livers and Nick Sampson were involved in this killing.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what the evidence right now shows. They were convinced that Livers and Sampson were involved somehow.
Yeah, so that kind of thing can be done on purpose by detectives, or I can see how you could kind of fall into that trap. Once you have the scenario in your head, you think that's what happened. So they kept interrogating the teens in an effort to get them to implicate Nick and Matt. And with intense questioning, Jessica Reed changed her story again, as did Fester. They said that they had met two men in a bar in Murdoch and went to the Stock home with them. They were showed photos of this bar, which was very suggestible. So when given photos to look at, Reed picked out Nick Sampson, but she didn't pick out a photo of Matt Livers. Fester picked out two photos, but neither one of them were these cousins. Eventually, Jessica Reed recanted her confession and told the police that she and Fester alone were responsible. And DNA on the ring, the marijuana pipe, and all over the stolen truck matched Fester and Reed and Wayne Stock and Sharmon Stock.
Right, and before these two kids went off on their crime spree, Reed had been living with Fester in Horicon, Wisconsin. And then on April 15th, they stole money, a 12-gauge shotgun, ammunition, and a couple cars.
Oh, yeah, more than a couple. I think they'd steal a car, go to another house, steal another car. Yeah.
So before stealing the red pickup truck that they drove to the Stock house, they had already stolen and abandoned two cars.
Yeah, at least two.
In the pickup, Reed and Fester first drove to Iowa. They had a plan to drive to Louisiana, stopping along the way to rob houses because it costs money to drive all those miles.
Yeah, so troubled young people.
So in Iowa, they vandalized a house and they stole a shotgun and some ammunition. Then they broke into another house in Iowa and stole about $300 in cash. And once in Nebraska, they found the Stock house purely by chance because they had no idea where they were or who lived there or anything.
Well, sure, they didn't even really know where they were. They just turned down this back road by chance and ended up at that house. So terrible luck for the Stocks.
Yeah, I mean, that's the chilling thing about this.
It is, because it could be any of us. It could happen to anybody.
It could. It's just so evilly random.
Yeah, and it's horrific to just, you're in your bed. That's where you feel safe. And then to wake up to that, it's like a nightmare. It's like a bad movie.
Yes.
But these teens even kept track of their travels on a map that was found in the truck. And the pickup was found in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, after Reed and Fester had returned to Wisconsin. It would be processed and found to have DNA, like I said, all over it, from Reed, Fester, and the Stocks.
And the Stocks.
Yes.
But not the two accused.
Not Nick and Matt, no.
Right.
So Reed and Fester's clothing and shoes also had the Stocks' blood all over them. So the case against these two is pretty much wrapped up, but they still didn't want to let go of the case against Nick and Matt. According to Jessica Reed's confession, Nick Fester entered the Stocks' home through an open first-floor window. Then once inside, he opened a back door and let her in. Jessica Reed had the .410 shotgun they'd stolen, and Fester had the 12-gauge shotgun. They intended to kill someone because they both walked upstairs after hearing snoring coming from up there. So it's not like they were just robbing the place and got surprised. I think they really went in there to kill people, which is really scary. In her account of the story, she followed Fester up the stairs, and once they reached the master bedroom, Fester turned on the light. So if you didn't want to kill people, why would you turn on the light when you know people are sleeping in there? Doesn't make any sense that way.
No, it doesn't.
No, so I really think they were looking for like a thrill kill. At least, I think they both were. So Fester stepped into the hallway and asked Reed what he should do, and she told him to do something. After that, Fester went back into the master bedroom and he shot Wayne Stock in the knee as he was getting out of bed. Then Wayne fought with Fester for the 12-gauge, and while they were fighting, Jessica Reed shot Wayne. She said that Wayne looked her in the eyes and she shot him just above his right eye. After he fell to the floor, Fester jumped over Wayne's body and shot him again in the back of the head. Then he turned and shot poor Sharmon Stock in the face. Just so brutal, so cold.
Yeah, and these are powerful shotguns. I mean, they do a job on you.
Well, shotguns do, yes. I don't know much about guns, but it certainly was a horrible scene. Then they left the house and they took off in the stolen pickup and they abandoned it later.
Okay, I need a break from this murder and mayhem.
Okay.
Let's listen to what our sponsor has to say and then we'll get a little background on the teenage killers.
You can take coloring your hair at home to the next level with Madison Reed. Madison Reed gives you gorgeous professional hair color delivered to your door for less than $25. Madison Reed hair color is one of a kind because it's multidimensional, and they give you your choice of over 45 multitonal shades that have all been developed by master colorists who really know how to blend nuances of cool, warm, light, and dark for just the right color. Many of our listeners have written to me and they tell me Madison Reed hair color has improved their lives, and I totally get it. Might seem like a small thing, but these small things add up and make a difference in your life. Madison Reed delivers gray coverage, it gives you natural-looking hair color, and it brings it to your door when you want it. So now, I'm free from salon visits and I'm saving money while my hair looks and feels better than ever. It's soft, it's strong, it's natural looking, and I have one less thing to worry about. So I'm always happy to recommend Madison Reed to our listeners. It's affordable, it's convenient, and it's very high quality. We're busy women, so don't we deserve gorgeous professional hair color delivered to our doors on our schedule for less than $25? Of course we do. Find your perfect shade at madison-reed.com. True Crime Brewery listeners get 10% off plus free shipping on their first color kit by using our code BREWERY. That's code BREWERY at madison-reed.com to find the perfect hair color for you.
Okay, back to the story. So we're going to talk about the two teens that committed this horrible crime. In Jessica Reed's pre-sentencing report, it was written that she had dropped out of school in the 10th grade. Her mother had separated from her stepfather when she was 13 years old, and up until that time she'd been a good student, often on the honor roll. But after the separation, which apparently she didn't take well, she began using drugs, skipping school, and running away from home. She was on juvenile probation when she was 15 for stealing. And then she had repeated parole violations, like drug use, and she was put in detention twice. Between June 2005 and January 2006, she was in custody for a total of 6 times for violations, including possession of drug paraphernalia, damage to property, and stealing. She was non-compliant with alcohol and drug treatment and refused to pay the ordered restitution. She is described by her Wisconsin Department of Social Services caseworker as, and I quote, extremely dishonest when dealing with anybody in authority, end quote. And she had also been noted to be a high risk for reoffending.
Well, yeah, she didn't seem to have a conscience, really.
All you got to do is watch the interviews with her and you can see that she just lacks a conscience.
Yeah, it's really scary, creepy.
Or lacks a rudder.
Yeah, and I mean, part of that is the teenage mind, I suppose, but still, pretty scary person.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of shit that teenagers do.
Right.
But this is way outside.
Yeah, this isn't one of the common
teenage
things.
Behavior, right?
Thank goodness, yeah. So after the Stocks murders, investigators found some evidence from Jessica Reed's home as well. 5 days after the murders, she had written in her journal, "I killed someone. He was older. I loved it. I wish I could do it all the time. If Greg doesn't watch it, I'm going to just leave one day and go do it by myself." So while Fester was in jail, Jessica wrote a letter to him and left it at her house. And maybe she thought he would get it after being released from the Wisconsin police on the theft charges. But the letter was actually left in a cigarette box along with a 12-gauge shotgun shell. In this letter she wrote, "And this bullet, well, Bunny, it's the only thing left, and I loved it, but that's something we'll talk about one day. But it's here because that was something I did for you, me, and for you to love me as much as I love you." Which really makes no sense.
No.
But it's just amazing that she's saying she loved killing these people.
She apparently did.
Yeah, so a little bit about Greg Fester, because he was just as troubled, if not more. He had a long history of drug and alcohol abuse, and he had a lengthy criminal record, even though he was only 19 when he and Jessica killed the Stocks. His previous arrests included shoplifting, disorderly conduct, car theft, and sexual assault. He had been under psychiatric care for most of his teen years, and he had been prescribed psychotropic medications. So, like I said, the ring and other evidence at the scene had DNA from Reed and Fester on them. But police believed that Matt Livers and Nick Sampson must have been involved too. They had Matt's confession and the blood evidence found in the car by Kofoed. So that's really all they had.
That's it?
Yep, that was the entirety of it. Just what Kofoed had found and Matt's confession. Because Nick was not confessing.
No, he stopped talking to them. The interrogators pressured Reed into saying that Livers and Sampson were involved in the murder, with her and Fester. Now, she did implicate the two men when she was threatened with a death sentence, but soon after recanted the confession.
So the two things that kept police believing that Matt Livers and Nick Sampson were involved were Livers' confession and the blood. But after viewing the videotaped confession, it really appeared to be coerced. I would definitely say that, without any hesitation. But then there was that blood. The special prosecutor, Clarence Mock, questioned its validity, though, and I give him credit for that.
Yeah, this is the prosecutor. I mean, he wants to try this case and win it, and he's expressing doubt.
He is, and when he talked to the public at a press conference, he said, "I don't want to put away the wrong people. I want the people who did this crime to go to prison." So the case against Livers and Sampson began to fall apart. The lie detector test that Livers was told he had failed had actually been incorrectly calculated.
So he might not have actually failed it, or it was inconclusive.
Yeah, but they can lie about that all the time. They're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And it seems like they do that a lot. Greg Fester pled guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of the use of a firearm in commission of a felony. So he was sentenced to life for each murder, plus 10 to 20 years for the firearms charge. Jessica Reed was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder, and she was given 2 life sentences. The court had to consider her age, of course, because she was 17 when these murders were committed. But she was determined to be of normal to above-average intelligence. Her drug history was found to be a contributing factor, but the court decided that her role in the killings was significant. It's not something that Fester would have gone and done on his own, probably.
Possibly not.
Right. And if she hadn't intervened when Wayne, Stock, and Fester were fighting over the gun, it was possible that neither of the Stocks would have been killed. Of course, her journal entry and her letter to Fester were incriminating, too.
Absolutely. Particularly the letter to him.
Yeah, so Fester's lawyer told 2 paragraphs in Culture that his client had been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, depression, adjustment disorder, personality disorder, alcohol dependence, and transvestite fetishism.
Quite a melange of diagnoses.
Yes, exactly. So Reed seems to have turned herself around in prison. She found religion and worked training dogs and puppies to be service dogs. I actually found a TED Talks by her on YouTube. It's titled Make Life Count, and she gave an inspirational talk to other inmates at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women, talking about the crime she committed a little bit, and she kind of blamed it on the death of her grandmother, which I really didn't find very convincing. But I'm glad that she's productive in prison anyway.
Nick Sampson was released from jail after being in prison for 6 months, and Livers ended up serving a little over 7 months. Now, the charges against them were dropped. Then the cousins turned around and filed civil rights lawsuits against the Douglas County law enforcement authorities. The lawsuits included complaints against 2 investigators from the State Patrol, 2 from the Sheriff's Office, Kofoed from the CSI unit, Douglas County, Cass County, and Douglas County Sheriff Tim Dunning. Now, Dunning was eventually dismissed from the suits, and he ended up writing a public apology to Livers. Well, Douglas County settled the suit before trial, but the other defendants fought the lawsuits.
Yeah, Livers and Sampson's attorneys attempted to prove that a confession was coerced from Matt Livers in a manner that shocked the conscience. So this is a higher standard than just mere negligence. The courts allow a wide range of behavior for law enforcement when it comes to interrogations. We know that they're allowed to lie and mislead suspects in order to get a confession. They also made claims to have evidence that they didn't have, which they're allowed to do, but they used it to coerce. And that included saying they had fingerprints, blood, and DNA that they didn't actually have. Still, interrogators are required to inform suspects of their rights, including the right to have an attorney present, and of course the right to remain silent. Matt Livers never asked for an attorney, but Nick Sampson did. Now, legally speaking, coercion is the act of overbearing a suspect's will. This is a violation of a person's 14th Amendment rights to due process. Judges have ruled that confessions obtained with physical force, threats of harm, or promises of reduced sentences are not voluntary and are not admissible in court. But there's a lot of gray in how these things are interpreted. And if you think back to other cases we've covered or just other cases you've heard about, there are certainly plenty of valid confessions that have some of these threats and promises in them, but they're still kept. They're still considered valid.
Yeah, there is a lot of gray in this.
Right, but the degree that they did it to Matt Livers was higher, and that's why they called it a shock to the conscience instead of just mere negligence. So confessions have been thrown out when the interrogations leading to the confession had problems. Some of these include the withholding of water, food, or sleep, keeping the suspect for an excessive length of time, or keeping them in excessively uncomfortable conditions like hot or cold. Confessions can also be contaminated when the police feed details of a crime to a suspect. And that's a big one, because that can end up as part of their confession and can be used against them like they knew details, but these were actually details that were fed to them by the police.
Which is what they did with Livers. They did some of that anyway.
Oh, quite a bit. Yes.
So there was a 2001 police interrogation in Missouri that was brought up as being similar to the case of Livers' confession. And the Missouri confession was thrown out on the grounds that the interrogators shocked the conscience. In the 2001 case, it was determined by the court that the police coerced a confession from an intellectually disabled man during a 4-hour interrogation with leading questions that gave away details of the crime scene. Also, the suspect's claims of his innocence were repeatedly ignored.
Yeah, so let's look at some of the details from Matt Livers' confession. He was interrogated for 11 hours? He hadn't eaten all that day. He hadn't even gone there on his own. They picked him up, which makes you feel less powerful. You feel kind of like you're in the hands of someone else. That's why I never like to go out with another couple in their car. You lose some independence there. And of course, this is a much more severe thing, but you know what I mean, that feeling of being at someone's mercy. He certainly had that. Picked up in the morning, nothing to eat, taken 50 miles from his home. He hadn't eaten, and he complained several times about the interrogation room being freezing. And these interrogation rooms, windowless, uncomfortable, they have a lot of things working in their favor to break someone down, especially someone who really doesn't have the intellectual capacity or, the emotional strength to stand up for themselves. And it was definitely the case with Livers.
Right. The interrogation of Livers had gone on for more than 6.5 hours. And at that point, Livers began to go along with the accusations against him. The confession was contaminated by the police telling Livers where the Stocks were when they were shot, that Sharmon Stock appeared to have attempted to get to the phone to call for help, and they gave Livers the specific locations of both victims' bodies.
Yeah, so that's some pretty drastic contamination.
It certainly is.
It is mentioned earlier, Matt was intellectually disabled, but the police didn't investigate his developmental history or any of his school evaluations, and they didn't do an IQ test until he had already been in jail for months. Psychological testing done months after his arrest determined his IQ to be 68, which makes him mildly mentally retarded. And interestingly enough, the test determined that his verbal abilities were actually more advanced than his general intellectual scores. So this verbal ability could have led investigators to believe that he was higher functioning than he actually was. So I think that was working against him.
Oh yeah, there's no question. So the lawyers for Livers and Sampson presented information that confirmed that relatives had told the police that Livers was slow. And they also brought up how Livers had referred to himself as dumb as a brick during his questioning.
Well, yeah, they were talking about how, people smarter than you have tried to fool us and have tried to get away with these things, and they haven't. Just beating him down. And he said, I'm dumb as a brick, which is really sad.
It is. Well, another telling thing was when the police asked Livers to be a man, stand up and accept responsibility, He took the phrase literally and stood up from his chair.
Yeah, so that's something a child might do.
Yeah.
Which makes you really sad to see that. Another issue brought up by the plaintiff's attorneys was how the prosecutor didn't turn over the tape of Matt Livers recanting his confession until 6 months after he had done it. The investigators claimed to have turned the tape over to the county prosecutors, and then they implied that the prosecutor had lost it. So we don't know if the prosecutor never got it, or was just never aware that it was there, because the prosecutor didn't seem to want to railroad these guys like some of the investigators definitely did. And I'm not saying that they wanted to convict innocent people, but they had convinced themselves that these guys were guilty. I mean, there were one or two that still think they're guilty, to this day. The interrogations of Greg Fester and Jessica Reed were also presented as being false or contaminated. The plaintiff's attorneys argued that interrogators Lambert and Shank manipulated and coerced the teens into incriminating Nick Sampson and Matt Livers by threatening them and giving them false information on the charges against them. So pretty much telling them that they could put it off on these guys and they wouldn't get in so much trouble.
Right. It's a good thought, huh?
It is, but it's a little horrific when you think that they were going to help out the actual killers.
I know.
And put these other guys who seem innocent to me into prison.
Yes.
Yeah.
Scary thought.
It is.
The judges and attorneys also believe that CSI Commander David Kofoed had manufactured evidence against the cousins by planting Wayne Stock's blood in the tan Ford Contour. It was alleged that all of the investigators conspired against the cousins and violated their civil rights. But the primary focus of the civil rights violations focused on Kofoed's planting blood evidence. So investigators Lambert and Schenck were deposed, and they testified that they had made several visits to the Douglas County Crime Lab to check on the evidence analysis in the case. And a lab technician employed there at the time called the two investigators pains because they had made multiple requests for repeat testing on the evidence.
Yeah, so what do you make of that?
Well, from their standpoint...
From whose standpoint?
I think superficially you could say they're just, they want to get this evidence done so they can move along with the case.
They're not saying they want it done. They're saying they want to repeat testing.
Then if you're into the conspiracy theory, they're looking for this to somehow find something that can implicate these two guys that they're convinced did the crime.
Well, I don't know if I'm into the conspiracy theory. I mean, the way you say that makes it sound a little like, craziness, like man never walked on the moon or something. But there's really evidence of a conspiracy here, not just a theory.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I know you probably mean that, but the way you said it was a little like, is he thinking I'm crazy?
Not me.
No, but you're not. So it was April 27th when Lambert asked Kofoed to reprocess the Ford Contour, even though it had already been thoroughly processed by a CSI team just days earlier. Livers had confessed just 2 days earlier as well. Kofoed and another CSI officer processed the car for the second time that very afternoon, and that's when Kofoed said he found blood underneath the dashboard beneath the steering column area. So this is where things get really interesting. We have a horrible crime. We have these teen killers, which is really upsetting. We have these two guys who are falsely put in jail. We get a coerced confession. And now we're getting into some real cover-up, some falsified evidence, and a guy who probably has a history of doing that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that, right?
Yes, let's talk about that.
That's fascinating.
It is.
Now, the log entry records at the crime lab showed that Lambert signed in at 8:05 p.m. on April 27th, and he stayed there for a little over 3 hours. Then he was back at the lab the next day. Now, when he was deposed, Lambert said he couldn't remember what he and Kofoed had talked about, other than finding the blood in the car.
Yeah, what do you think of that? Do you believe that? I had a hard time believing that.
It smells.
It does.
Now, this would seem to have been a big find, but Kofoed didn't write up a report that day about the blood, and he didn't have it tested at that point to determine if it had come from Wayne and Sharmon Stock. No, he put the swab into the evidence room and left it there for a week.
So that is so suspicious. If he actually found Wayne Stock's blood in the car, it's a huge find, and you think he would want it tested, immediately. as soon as possible.
One would think, huh?
But he tucked it away.
Yep.
So then on May 4th, the results from the DNA on the marijuana pipe showed that didn't come from Nick Sampson or Matt Livers. Investigator Shank was at the crime lab the next day, and he stayed for an unknown amount of time. In his deposition, he would say that he couldn't remember what he was doing there or who he had spoken to. Kofoed then wrote up a fraudulent report, claiming that the blood in the car was discovered on May 8th, not April 27th. So the swab was then tested, and the blood came back as belonging to Wayne Stock. So there's a big lapse there.
There is.
Plus, we know that he falsified the report. So if this wasn't false evidence, then why would he do a fraudulent report?
Why indeed, right?
Yeah, so it's really making him look bad.
So Kofoed's blood evidence was the only evidence that connected Sampson and Livers to the murders. As a result of a CSI informant's accusation that Kofoed had planted the blood, the FBI then began an investigation of Kofoed. Very interesting. So they're starting to look at him.
Well, and it's about time they do.
Well, the other thing, when you think about it, this car had already been gone through thoroughly once. And then when Kofoed looks at it a second time, he finds this one teeny speck of blood in a place that's highly unlikely that it would be found there.
Yeah, it'd be weird how it would even get up there and not be any on the carpet by where someone's feet would be or anything. It's a weird spot.
Certainly is.
So one aspect of the civil lawsuits that was also raised was that probable cause must be shown to support an arrest. That seems pretty basic. Matt Livers had been arrested after investigators picked him up at his house on April 25th, kept him in the cold interview room, and then told him he had failed the polygraph. This was prior to the confession, so they believed he was arrested without probable cause and then coerced into the confession. Because he was naive. He really didn't think he could just leave.
No, he didn't.
He didn't. He felt like he was really trapped there.
Now, lawyers for the investigators used something called the defense of qualified immunity to try to get the lawsuits dismissed. Qualified immunity protects police officers from civil liability when they believe they are working legally and they are performing in a reasonable way. To get past this, the attorneys for Livers and Sampson needed to convince the court that their rights had been violated by the interrogators' actions. The case was eventually ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, but it was appealed. Then in 2012, the appeals court dismissed the Douglas County Sheriff from the lawsuits, and it was decided that the case would be put on before a jury.
Yeah, this time the attorneys for the investigators argued that the confession was valid because Matt Livers had given crime scene facts that weren't fed to him by his interrogators. So these facts were just the color and location of the tan car that was seen outside of the Stock house, and that Wayne had been shot in the knee as he tried to get away from the shooter. But Livers' lawyer answered this by saying that Matt Livers' father had given Matt that information because he'd heard about it at the funeral. So that really wasn't any information that only the killer would know, because other people knew it, and it seems that someone had shared it with Livers.
Now, according to Livers' attorney, it was obvious while watching the interview tape that Livers was taking cues from the interrogators on what he thought they wanted him to say.
Oh, absolutely.
So the civil case was about to go to jury trial when the Attorney General said that his office decided to settle in the interest of saving money by not risking a large settlement that could happen if it went to trial. So his final statements on the case were aimed at blaming Kofoed, who he called a dirty cop. And because of Kofoed's actions, he said he had no choice but to settle.
So totally putting it on Kofoed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hung him out. He claimed that other members of law enforcement did their jobs correctly. So the case is settled with no admission of wrongdoing from the investigators.
Yeah, and investigator Lambert continues to maintain that Livers is guilty based on that confession. He and the polygrapher, O'Callahan, kept their jobs with the Nebraska State Patrol. And O'Callahan disagrees with the determination that Livers' polygraph was not deceptive, but actually inconclusive. He says that it was absolutely deceptive. Livers received a $1.65 million settlement, and Nick Sampson received $965,000. And in addition to the money, the settlement called for the investigators to get training on the interrogation of persons with learning disabilities and mental illnesses. And I'm pretty shocked to learn that they don't get that kind of training.
Yeah, we'll do it after the fact.
Yeah, I guess that they had said, I think it was Shank who said that he had learned some of that in school, but nothing after he was hired. Just kind of a brief interview in school over it.
Yeah. Shank was transferred to courtroom security after the charges against Sampson and Livers fell apart. So that's a demotion.
Sure, I would think so.
Shank was arrested for DUI in 2010, and he ended up, after some time, resigning from the sheriff's office. He got arrested after that for driving with a suspended license.
So I don't know what he was like before all this happened, but it kind of gives you the impression that going through this lawsuit kind of messed him up and made his life kind of circle the drain.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable interpretation.
You think so?
Yeah.
Well, if you watch the interrogation of Matt Livers, it's pretty disturbing. It really reminds me quite a bit of the confession that was coerced from Stephen Avery's nephew, Brandon Dassey. But many experts say that the tactics used in these interviews are really seen routinely all over the country. So that's a disturbing thing, but I believe it. I think I've seen enough of these coerced confessions to think it's probably fairly common.
Yeah, one expert who works as a consultant for law enforcement has said that he uses the Livers videotaped interrogation to teach law enforcement agencies how to avoid getting false confessions when they interview suspects. Most noteworthy is how the interrogators fed Livers crime scene information before the confession.
Well, yeah, for a confession to be believable, the suspect should be able to give a story of the crime that's consistent with the evidence, right? That's a no-brainer.
Right, and you have to be able to ascertain that the suspect could have been the perpetrator, so they need to ask these questions.
Right, without giving them the answers.
Right.
If the confession had been true, Livers should have been able to give the police the location of some of the physical evidence. Like basically the murder weapon. He should have known where the murder weapon was, right?
Right.
And bloody clothing. And they took all his clothing and shoes, and he wasn't that tricky. And there was no evidence anywhere that he had been in the Stock's home. So let's go back to Kofoed for a minute, because that's really fascinating.
It sure is.
The state charged him with falsifying DNA evidence during the investigation of the cousins for the Stock murders and violating Sampson and Livers' civil rights. He denied it, of course, and he even passed a polygraph. So I'm not sure what to think about that. We know that the polygraph is not 100%.
Well, and if you believe something you're saying is correct, sure.
Yeah, so if he was really convinced that he had done the right thing regardless, he might be able to pass.
Yeah, I think so.
And he continues to deny it.
I think he can stick it somewhere that he was falsifying evidence. He was just helping out the police to build their case.
Well, and I kind of think that's what he believed. It was very corrupt, but I really think that he did believe he was doing a good thing by doing this.
Yeah.
And he was always wanting to get involved with cases that were getting a lot of publicity. I think he was pretty cocky about his abilities. He was seen as one of the best CSI guys out there. And I think when he saw that someone was probably guilty, or he was convinced someone was guilty, he really didn't have a problem making up evidence to back that up.
Yeah, well, let's just say he would do whatever he could do to help the investigation.
Sure, and I think that some of those police investigators knew that too.
Yeah.
Even though that hasn't been proven. But interestingly enough, for his trial, the court allowed evidence of an uncharged extrinsic crime committed by Kofoed in a 2003 investigation into a child's murder. So they're bringing a crime that they believe he did that he was never charged with from the past to kind of show that he has a history there. And the information from this crime was used to contradict Kofoed's claim that there was a mistake or an accident in handling the evidence. And that would explain why he found Wayne Stock's blood in the contour. That he hadn't done it, but, somebody hadn't cleaned things or followed procedure, and it had been contaminated.
he didn't do this himself. Someone else had put the blood evidence there, and he merely recovered it and tested it.
Yeah, or he had admitted that maybe he didn't store it correctly or schedule the testing correctly. So he didn't necessarily say that none of it was his fault, but he definitely said it wasn't purposeful. It was accidental.
Right. And this other case that was allowed into the evidence was a murder in 2003. A guy named Ivan Hank pleaded guilty to first-degree murder just before his trial was going to start. Now, he was accused of murdering his 4-year-old son, Brendan Gonzalez. Brendan, who had been reportedly last seen with Hank, disappeared on January 6, 2003, and his body has never been found.
And this, of course, was a horrifying case, a father killing his son. And it seemed like the guy was pretty crazy and very dangerous. In court, in April of 2003, Hank yelled at Brendan's mother that he had killed Brendan because he was the Antichrist, and that the child had 666 on his forehead. So that's just really disturbing. And the history of this is that Brendan lived with his mother, Rebecca, and when he was 3 years old, his father, Ivan, came back into their lives. The relationship with Ivan and Brendan was never good. He never bonded with the child, and Ivan was jealous of the attention that Rebecca was giving to Brendan. So over the next several months, things had gotten worse and worse, and Brendan told his mom that his father wasn't nice to him. He began to kind of fear his dad. So Rebecca told Ivan that he needed to step up and be a better father. But on January 6th of 2003, Ivan lured Brendan into their garage and murdered the child. After 4 months of the authorities searching for Brendan, Ivan admitted that the cause of Brendan's death was that he had decapitated him and disposed of the child in a dumpster. Investigators found blood on the garage floor, a recliner, and a bicycle. So there was so much blood that they basically knew the child was dead, but his body was never found. Now, Kofoed and another CSI kept the specimens in a biohazard room, and DNA testing showed that the blood was Brendan's, but still they didn't find the body, and Hank had confessed to the killing on June 2nd of 2003. He said he put a comforter over Brendan and decapitated him with a knife. Then he said he took the child's body in the comforter and put it in the apartment building's dumpster. The dumpster was seized by police and taken to a police storage building to be processed.
Yeah, and that same day, which was June 2nd, Kofoed and a co-worker of his processed the dumpster for DNA. So this dumpster had been emptied twice a week over the 6 months since the murder had occurred. It had flip-open top lids that actually were left open quite a bit, so the inside was exposed to the elements. When they seized the dumpster, there was liquid in the bottom of the dumpster. So Kofoed removed the garbage, emptied the liquid, and sprayed the interior with phenolphthalein, which shows a reaction to iron, and that's a component of red blood cells. So they noted reactions at the lower front and bottom of the dumpster. They collected a caked-on, dark-colored substance and swabbed the dumpster. So Kofoed separated out a piece of glass and a piece of cardboard with dirt and hair on it. Now, his co-worker testified that he wasn't with Kofoed when he swabbed the debris. Swabs that were sent to the University of Nebraska Medical Center only tested for a partial DNA profile. But Kofoed's swab had a complete DNA profile that matched Brendan. The FBI was not able to duplicate Kofoed's results, and they even did more specific testing, but still couldn't get identifiable DNA.
So that's a real red flag when your results can't be.
When you can't duplicate the results, there's something wrong there.
Right. I mean, that's just a basic rule in science. You have to be able to duplicate results. Right?
Yeah, they got to be reproducible. Otherwise, I'm not believing that you just discovered cold fusion or whatever.
Yeah, right. So to determine if Kofoed had falsified evidence, the court had to decide if Kofoed had taken the DNA evidence from the blood that had previously been collected from the garage where the crime took place. This was based on the question of if it was possible for Kofoed to have found non-degraded DNA from blood that had been in this open dumpster for 6 months. And there was a lot of talk about that, a lot of different research done, but basically it did not go in Kofoed's favor. Correct?
Correct. The biggest thing was that DNA experts said there's no way that you're going to recover non-degraded DNA after 6 months in that dumpster.
And Kofoed tried to argue that with talking about 9/11 and how they had found complete DNA in the rubble after the plane crashed and the towers went down. But the court did not think that was comparable.
No, it's not, anyway.
You don't think it's comparable?
No. So Kofoed was found guilty of evidence tampering in the Stock investigation. So the court found that the 2003 Brendan Gonzalez case and the 2006 Stock case had important similarities. Certainly, they do. So Kofoed was found guilty of evidence tampering in the Stock investigation. He was sentenced to 20 months to 4 years in prison, and he continues to maintain his innocence.
Well, his argument was that if he did plant evidence, he would have done a better job of it. And I always loved this argument.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so smart, I would have done it in a different way.
Yeah, why would I have done something so stupid? I would have known I'd get caught. Yeah, very familiar argument.
That doesn't fly.
No. I mean, he had access to the clothing and the shoes of both Livers and Sampson. So it didn't make sense to him that he would have planted evidence in the car. Why wouldn't he have just planted it on those items? His lawyer argued that Kofoed was the one who told Gabick to track down where the engraved ring had come from. And that was the evidence that would prove someone else had murdered the Stock. So why would he have wanted her to track down the ring if he didn't want to find the true killers? That was his argument. But I feel like he could have done that just to try and use it against Livers and Sampson if he really thought they were guilty. And he was probably shocked to hear that the ring had come from Wisconsin and had other people's DNA on it that we didn't even know about yet.
Right. Because I'm positive he was just waiting for the testing to get done that would implicate Livers and Sampson even more.
And I bet when he's done this in the past, that's usually what happens, right?
Yeah.
Usually it goes along with what he thinks, but this was a surprise.
It certainly was. Now, the Stocks case and the Brendan Gonzalez case weren't Kofoed's only troubled cases, right?
Well, yeah, there was the case of Jessica O'Grady, the one we covered recently, a couple months ago, I guess. And that occurred in 2007. Well, in 2007, Christopher Edwards was convicted of murdering his teenage girlfriend, Jessica O'Grady, and her body's never been found, but prosecutors used forensic evidence to prove to the jury that he had stabbed her to death in his bedroom. And detectives believed that he had used his car to move the body to a dump site. You know, just common sense. How else would he have gotten her there?
No, there's no other way, probably. So it was after his guilty verdict, then David Kofoed was convicted of tampering with evidence collected in the Stocks homicide investigation. On 2012, Edwards' attorneys argued that his conviction should be set aside. They argued that Kofoed was in a position to fabricate evidence.
Repeat that.
They argued that Kofoed had been in a position to fabricate evidence.
Well, yeah, small amounts of blood discovered in the trunk of Edwards' car were questioned by Edwards' attorney. And these were suspicious. The finding was suspicious, right?
It was, yes. I mean, but in this case, there was plenty of other evidence.
Right. During the investigation into Jessica's murder, Kofoed had ordered a second inspection of Edwards' car, which was a Honda. So he had ordered an inspection of the trunk and a second round of chemical tests for human blood on some items that had been removed from the Honda. So Kofoed claimed to find a dark stain that looked like blood on the rubber edging around the Honda's trunk. A field test was done and it came back presumptive for blood. Kofoed then ordered second tests on a shovel and some hedge clippers that were recovered from the Honda. Previously overlooked blood was found on those too, so that was suspicious. The items had been delivered by Kofoed to the University of Nebraska Medical Center DNA laboratory, and they had found a DNA match to Jessica O'Grady. So here's some more evidence that was handled by him that came back positive.
Right. Now, eventually Edwards' appeal was denied, And mostly this was denied because the blood evidence in question was determined not to be enough to overturn his conviction. In other words, there was enough other stuff to make a conviction.
Oh, absolutely.
So he was denied a new trial. And if you remember that case when we did it, you'll remember that she had gone to see him the night she disappeared. And when the police searched Edward's bedroom, they found that his mattress was soaked in Jessica's blood. And Edwards had attempted to cover up blood spatter on his walls and ceiling.
Yes, so the only thing is if Kofoed did that, there was plenty of evidence, so why would he feel the need to do that?
You got me.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about that, but they never said that Edwards couldn't have an appeal because Kofoed didn't do that, and there was no sign that he had done that.
No, they didn't say that, did they?
No, I think they pretty much believed it was quite possible, but it wouldn't matter anyway because there was so much other evidence.
Yes.
And that mattress was so soaked, there was no doubt that someone had been murdered on it. And when they tested the blood, it was Jessica O'Grady's, so it's kind of a no-brainer.
Well, it was easy.
Plus, if you remember, she had thought she was pregnant. You know, that's always a big motivation for a woman to get killed, is to tell her boyfriend she's pregnant, unfortunately. So the story of Kofoed and his involvement in several cases is really fascinating. I'd like to thank the Omaha World Herald for their excellent coverage of this case. There's a great episode of the confession tapes on Netflix that's titled Joyride that also covers the Stocks murder case and some of what happened with Kofoed. Dateline also covered this case with my man Keith Morrison in an episode titled In the Dead of Night. He was a little bit younger in that episode. He was pretty sexy back then.
The silver fox.
Yeah, right. So for our Team Tie Grabber members, I'd just like to remind you that you need to go to the website and update your payment information within the next couple of weeks, or you can just rejoin whenever you want. For our longtime supporters, though, who joined at the $2 or $3 level, I've added you all to the membership list at that price. So if you go in, change your password, and go in to update your payment information, you're going to stay at the $2 or $3 a month. We're going to grandfather you in because I know I promised I would do that. So we finally have that into the website, that capability. So you can go ahead and do that. And I'll put the link in our show notes in case you didn't get our email about how to do that. It's pretty simple. You just need to click on the link, reset your password, and then under My Account, you choose Change Payment to enter your information. And you can still use PayPal if you want, but now there's an option to use credit card as well, or instead of. And for anyone who wants to join, who hasn't joined, the process is very simple and it's quite seamless now. And we have over 30 members-only episodes that are available. Our August members-only episode was on John List. That's one of my favorite ones in a while, because I find that a fascinating case. A man who killed his entire family in kind of a systematic way, and then disappeared for many years, and was actually found because of America's Most Wanted and a neighbor. So that was pretty cool. And also there's some really weird motivations behind these crimes. So we did a lot of delving into his mind, his religious upbringing, and his family, and how really cold-blooded this guy was. So for our September members-only case, we've chosen the case of Minister A.B. Shermer. And you might have heard this case. Shermer had 2 wives die mysteriously before the husband of a woman he was having an affair with killed himself at the minister's desk. So I must confess I do have kind of a morbid fascination with the men of God who kill their wives. So I did pick this one out. And this one, though, is just over the top in how the wives died and how there was really a lack of an investigation for years. These are very suspicious deaths.
No, just a total lack. And both deaths, but particularly the automobile accident death.
Crazy, right?
Just, man, I don't see how you can believe the minister's story of what happened.
I mean, the car was basically just dinged, and she supposedly died in a car accident in that car. So that was some craziness.
It was, but we'll talk about that.
We will. I look forward to it. So if you'd like to hear that one, you can join and become a tie grabber yourself at tiegrabber.com, clicking on subscribe there. And we now have options to join that include monthly, quarterly, or annual plans. Another new feature is that our members get to choose their welcome gift. You can choose a snifter, a bottle opener, or a set of coasters. Of course, you always get stickers or magnets with that as well. So that's enough of that. Let's move on to feedback. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, go to tiegrabber.com and click on Leave a Voicemail. That's a tab on the right side of our homepage. Or you can send us an email to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com or leave us a message on social media. We have a closed group also on Facebook that's called the True Crime Brewery Fan Discussion Page, where many of our listeners are very active, and it's an interesting place to just discuss some true crime. Maybe while dinner's in the oven, you're a little bored, you can pop on there. See, some people make some really interesting posts there. Some of them even a little funny. So what have we got for feedback?
I have one voicemail and 2 emails for you. The voicemail is from Tina. It's a comment on the episode we did about the honor killing of the Indian woman.
Okay.
Hi, Jill and Dick. My name is Tina, and I wanted to congratulate you on your wonderful job on the honor killing of Jassi Sidhu. Your research, your commentary on the socio-religious norms was spot on. And also where you voiced your incredulity and surprise at, these slightly poetic situations of them sitting opposite each other in the bus and, she going, "Oh, I love you," and drawing a heart. To all of us Indians, it's basically a Bollywood movie. Every single Bollywood movie to date, God knows how many there are, is about a rich girl falling in love with a poor guy and how they fight against their parents and, love wins it all. So yes, it is very Romeo-Juliet-esque. Sadly, this did not have a Bollywood ending. Nobody lived happily ever after. It was a sad ending, but yes. So basically, I just, as an Indian, I just want to congratulate how right you got on your instincts, on your commentary and analysis. All your podcasts are stellar. Thank you for doing what you do and your commentary. Have a lovely day. Bye.
Well, thank you, Tina. That's really nice.
Yeah, you do these episodes about a foreign culture that you have little or no comprehension of.
Sure.
So it was nice to hear from a native that we got pretty much everything correct.
Yes.
As we did it.
I don't know about stellar. I mean, we're still a work in progress, but
yeah, well,
that was an interesting episode to cover, to research, and that was actually a members-only episode, so.
It was. So there's a reason for all you folks to become members.
That's right, yep. Because some of my favorite episodes are on the members-only feed.
Yeah, we've done some good ones.
So we have an email from Anne.
So Anne says, "Hi, I left a voicemail once before suggesting the story of Kelly Ann Tynes. Her murderer, Robert Golub, is up for parole again, and her father has a gopetition.com up to try to keep him in jail. There's a book written about the story called Against Her Will, The Senseless Murder of Kelly Ann Tynes. Hearing about the father's petition reminded me once again of this terrible murder. It was a national news story at the time because of the young victim, young killer or killers, and aftermath in the neighborhood. Maybe you want to check it out, or maybe not. But it might be interested to hear about. I listen every week and never heard you mention this suggestion. Anyway, I hope the murderer remains in jail, and Kelly's parents can at least have that."
Yes, Anne, I apologize if you left a voicemail and we didn't play it. A lot of the voicemails we don't play, it's just because of the audio issues. They can be really not great. And then we don't want to disturb other listeners by having them hear more fucked up audio, especially if I've already fucked some up. It just adds more to the fuckery. Right?
Well, that's a concise explanation.
I thought you'd like that. So this case of Kelly Ann Tynes, I don't remember hearing about it, but it occurred in March of 1989. And this was just a 13-year-old girl in Valley Stream, New York, who was strangled, stabbed, and mutilated. Her body was discovered in the basement of her neighbor, a 21-year-old bodybuilder, who was charged and convicted of her murder. He was convicted based on DNA evidence that showed he matched the genetic markers found in a blood sample discovered on evidence. So this trial was the first case in New York State to have a case won by DNA forensic evidence. That makes it interesting.
I thought so.
Also, it was reopened in March of 2009 to investigate the possibility of an accomplice. So that's interesting, and there is a whole book written about it that I will read and think about doing an episode. It's called Against Her Will, and it is available on Amazon. I looked that up. So good suggestion.
I like the suggestion.
Okay.
And the other reason, I don't want to make a lot of excuses, Anne, for not playing your voicemail.
But you're going to add one.
But I'm going to add one.
Okay.
Right. And it might have been just a time when I had a ton of voicemails and I had to choose which ones I wanted. And then being elderly, I forget about the ones that I didn't choose.
Yeah.
And it didn't get played.
Well, yeah, and they come in droves at one time, and then you'll have a dry spell. So it's really hard to say.
Yes, but again, no real excuse, and I'm glad you persisted because it is a great sounding case, and I think we'll be doing it.
Okay, great. So our next email is from Rosie. It's a case suggestion, and she said she wrote it on Labor Day weekend, and she's been binge listening. She drives to a lot of patients' houses, and she's been listening to our podcast as she does that. And she loves Dick's voice. That gravelly, sexy kind of thing. I love the banter. You make a great team. And I love beer, she says. Please consider doing an episode on Derek Todd Lee or Sean Vincent Gillis, who were serial killers in Louisiana. And they were killing at the same time. Also, the Kraft's beers here are phenomenal. We have Abita, Canebrake, Tin Roof, etc. Try some Abita Strawgator. If you like, I can send you a bottle. They also make an incredibly delicious old-fashioned lager. And she says that she listens to us on Spotify and gives us a 5+. So thanks a lot. That's great, Rosie.
Yeah, Rosie I think she's an LPN because that's how her email and stuff was written out, Rosie LPN.
All right, so she does some home care.
So she's a licensed practical nurse and does home care.
Okay.
So that's a good thing to do, as you're driving around to patients' houses. Just don't murder any of your patients, Rosie.
Yeah, I don't think that our podcast would make her do that. Do you know of any of these beers?
I've had some Abita beers, and sorry to say I don't share Rosie's glowing opinion of them.
No.
But we'll try, maybe there's some other ones that are better.
Well, have you tried all of the ones she mentioned?
No, I have not.
Okay, so
I've only tried a couple.
Okay, so we'll try the ones that we haven't.
We might do that, or I've had one beer from Tin Roof that was absolutely incredible, so who knows? I don't figure that out till I have to.
Okay. So a little bit about this case with the two serial killers. Derek Todd Lee, also known as the Baton Rouge serial killer, had a killing spree that began in 1992 and ended in 2003, and he actually murdered 7 women. Prior to his murder charges, he'd been arrested for stalking women and watching them in their homes. So that's pretty common when serial killers are building up to killing. They do a lot of that sort of thing. Despite this, he was initially overlooked by police because they incorrectly believed that the killer was a white man. Lee was linked by DNA tests to the deaths of 7 women in the Baton Rouge and Lafayette areas in Louisiana, and in 2004 was convicted for 2 murders.
2 murders.
Yeah. Geraldine DeSoto and Charlotte Murray Pace. The Pace trial resulted in his death sentence. Newspapers suggested that Lee was responsible for some other unsolved murders in the area, but the police lacked DNA evidence to prove the connection. And after Lee's arrest, it was discovered that there was another serial killer, Sean Vincent Gillis, who was operating in the Baton Rouge area the same time as Lee.
Yeah, so that's just fascinating as heck to me, that there would be 2 serial killers at the same time operating.
Right.
It's a city, but it's not a huge area. It's not like New York City or Los Angeles or anything like that. So I was just fascinated that we had 2 serial killers at the same time in a fairly small area.
Yeah, that's awful. You notice that each of these killers went by 3 names?
Right.
Do you think that's something that serial killers do in their life, or is that something that the media or the police do so that every Sean Gillis won't be seen as a serial killer? It makes it more specific by saying Sean Vincent Gillis.
Possibly. I guess I'd have to dig in and do some research and see if they were known by all three names throughout their lives or if this was something recent after they'd been arrested.
Yeah, because a lot of these killers go by three names. But then I can think of a bunch who don't, right? So,
right.
Yeah. Well, Lee actually died of heart disease in a hospital, so he never did get the death penalty.
Well, he got the death penalty. He
was never carried out.
Was never executed because he died of heart disease.
Right.
Interesting stuff.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback. We really appreciate it. And thank you for listening to us today.
Yeah, thank you.
So we will see you next time at The Quiet End. Bye-bye.
See ya.